Okay, welcome to this session on innovating in compliance and diversity. We've got three great people on our panel who I'm going to introduce for you. We have Sharon Kaliouby, who's from State Street Global Advisors in Boston. We also have Adam Lancaster from Channel 4. And we also have Baldwin from Babcock International. I'll let them do more of an intro when their session comes up, because they're each going to run through what they've been doing to innovate in the compliance and diversity training that they have been doing. My name's Matt Brewer, and in a slight change to the advertised program, I don't actually work at Chubb Insurance Company anymore. I work at Markel Insurance Company, but that's neither here nor there, really. What we're going to do is we're going to run through what each of the guys have done. We're also then, unusually, I think, we're going to look at the guide that you had for this session in the program, and we're going to run through the 5 main questions that were actually asked and ask each of our panelists how they have dealt with each of those issues that have come up to make sure that everyone gets out of the session what they've come for. Okay, but we want to make it as fun, as interactive as possible. Questions all the way through after each person's session is great. Anything that you want to know about compliance and innovating in compliance in your organizations, please just ask as we go. I was trying to come up with a little analogy for how I've seen compliance done in the past, and the only thing I could think of was relating it to, this might sound strange, a drunken uncle at a family wedding. Now, the reason why I said that, okay, this is how it's perhaps done badly in the past in my company as well. If you imagine the drunken uncle goes around asking everybody at the wedding what they're doing, asking them all these questions that they have absolutely no interest in, it probably relates to your compliance training in the past. You'll think perhaps that when he's asking you these questions, you'll just nod your head, trying to get through the conversation as fast as you can and get to the end of it as quickly as you can. That relates to some of the compliance training I've created in the past. And then at the end of it, you won't have a clue what he was talking to you about. Okay? They're all things that you can innovate your way out of, and you don't have to do things that way. And that's what we're going to try and aim at in this session. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand you over first to Sharon, who's going to run through what she's been doing. Okay? So I'll pass you over to Sharon now.
Hi, guys. Where I'm going to start from is I've been at State Street Global Advisors for about a year now, just about a year and a week. We are at the point in our organization where diversity is of great value and interest. However, we're not running a million instructor-led programs. We don't have a huge curriculum. We're actually at the stage now, we're building awareness, and we're going to show you a video that State Street does in partnership with the TED Talks. There's a great long relationship there, and we're starting to circulate that and communicate that to the population through the weekly newsletters that we get from our communications group. I'll then kind of chat about the areas of compliance, and with compliance we do have many online courses that we are required to take. As a new hire, you have to take some, and you have to take them in a number of days, and if you don't, there's great punishment based on the fact that this is so important to the organization. I'll illustrate how we, as a learning organization, I'm head of product education. Somehow we have fallen into the area within State Street Global Advisors to create this experience of compliancy in more of a supplemental behavioral change type of agent. And we do that with content in innovative areas where we're allowed to do it. So we're not ever going to say we have to get rid of the compliance training, the click next. What we're trying to do is complement it, and perhaps in a couple of years create, we'll go through the questions, but create real innovative solutions that they will be replicable and they will be things that can replace that which is click next and not always the best way to experience learning. So with that being said, I'd like to start us right into the video. And this is, you can look this up, this is a TED Talk.
Folklore. When you hear that word, what do you picture? Fables, heroes, legends? Most of us think of folklore as something belonging to the past, but it is present and pervasive in our lives today. Simply defined, folklore is all the stories we tell ourselves as a culture. And you might be surprised just how deeply these stories live inside us. Imagine, if you will, a company selecting its next CEO. The candidate they've identified is experienced, highly skilled, confident, outspoken. Who did you see? If you pictured a man, you're not alone. This is a result of gender folklore, narratives we've heard and shared for so long we've accepted them as the truth, and that has consequences. Although women hold almost 52% of all professional level jobs, when it comes to leadership, women are only 20% of financial asset managers, 14.6% of executive officers, and less than 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs. And it's a self-perpetuating cycle. When they don't see themselves represented in these positions, less young women major in business-related fields, even fewer women get graduate degrees in finance, creating a huge imbalance by the time you reach the workforce, and an even bigger imbalance between the men who run the world's biggest organizations and the women who don't. There's a real problem there, and it's a problem with real impact. Women earn a fraction of every man's dollar. Female entrepreneurs tend to be less trusted. Female managers are stereotyped as less skilled, meaning even the most qualified women often lose out to men in similar positions. So what are we saying? That women would make better leaders than men? No.
So that's
that would
important.
just be another kind of folklore. What we need are more diverse points of view. Studies show that the best business decisions are made by integrated teams of men and women. More long-term investments, more informed decisions, more profitable returns. What if leadership weren't just about winning, but about understanding, trust, emotional intelligence, decisions that benefit the whole, and not just the few? How different our world might be. Experienced, confident, outspoken, CEO. This time, did you picture someone different? Great. But getting there starts all the way back at folklore, with those stories we tell ourselves. It's time we confront gender folklore head on, so we can change those stories and start changing the world.
So what this really represents is starting with the job application process, making sure that when we're writing it to attract men and women. We're writing it, and there's a whole bunch of research on this. Much of what you saw here with trust and the ability to reach out and create that diverse workplace, you might have heard in the keynotes yesterday. And that's where we're starting, not at these classes, which, yes, are very important, but even when we're getting our job applications out, ensuring that we're first pulling in a diverse workforce, diversity of thought, gender, and ethnicities. All those things are very, very important. And that's where SSGA is, from my perspective, in regard to the diversity area. I'll mention one thing, and I'll answer the questions later, but with the compliance world, what we noticed most was our compliance training last year, probably in 2014, I'm sorry, not 2015, equal to about 7 hours of regulatory courses. And that's painful, but it's needed. What has happened in 2015 is that over doubled. So our workforce was expected to get into over 15 to 18 hours, and that's if they weren't new hires and they knew what they were doing, worth of training. And our goal this year to come is to see how can that be consolidated, how can we use things like brain science and innovation to really make that a lot more fluid so that our population not only feels as though they have to go through it, their impact and behavior has changed, but they have the bandwidth to take on my area of product education, because they can't even absorb that if they're that overwhelmed with things like regulatory and compliance training. So that's my story for now.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. What we'll do now is, Norman, if we can ask you to run through yours, and we'll silently switch the laptops over whilst we're doing that as well, so you will never notice the difference. Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I guess I got the fitting role while the technology gets swapped over. I mentioned in the introduction that I come from Babcock International Group, and I don't know if you know much about Babcock International, but we're a engineering support services company. And you might wonder, what in engineering, I guess a fairly male-dominated industry, what the drivers are there. And certainly for us, diversity is a key part of what we do, a key part of trying to attract a more diverse workforce. So we're actually doing a lot around diversity, a lot around building up a much more proportionate profile of our workforce. Also, as a a large training services company in the UK. We're actually one of the largest training services providers in the UK. We're doing a lot of training for our customers. And one of the sort of key important areas for our customers is around making sure their people are suitably qualified and experienced to do the work that they're involved in. We specialize in critical industries, so rail, nuclear, energy, all those industries where compliance is really important, and compliance from a health and safety perspective, as well as clearly making sure that people are able to do the work that they're meant to do and also need to do. So again, for us, that whole compliance is much broader. It's also, around making sure people can work safely in a workplace environment. Also, within Babcock, we have a number of guiding principles, and coming back to how you make training effective, and you really make sure that you're not just training people in these things, but it has some stickiness and it's reinforced. I think that organizational culture piece, what are your values in the organization? Do your values reflect the training that you're giving people? So if you have strong organizational values, and that reflects your diversity training, your safety training, that is, where you really make sure that the training people receive is effective and they actually live and breathe it, rather than it just diminishes until they get the next refresher training 12 months to 24 months later. So I personally feel that, getting the right organizational culture is absolutely key to making your diversity and compliance training really effective. In terms of some of the things we're doing, particularly with our customers, around the data part, compliance is a big issue. We all do the training, it's all recorded somewhere, and hopefully something is actually done with that data, rather than it just being hidden away in a HR data store area somewhere. It's very critical in a number of our industries, particularly nuclear, rail, anywhere where there is a potential for an investigation or a regulator wants to come in and ensure that people working in that industry are skilled. So when we deliver our services to our clients, we're actually recording that data and making sure that we know who is qualified and what they're qualified in. So we use the role-based competencies that you're probably all familiar with and have in your own organizations. So we build those role-based competencies, we build the training portfolio around those competencies, and then that enables us to look at the overall compliance of the organization. So we can run a check and say, yes, the organization is fully compliant, everybody's done all of their training. We know when people are coming out of those competencies, so we can then schedule courses to ensure those people have the opportunity to refresh that particular training. So in some cases, that's e-learning, which is always online, always available, but quite often it's classroom-based courses as well. So in those services, we are constantly monitoring the compliance of the organization, what training is needed, and then putting those courses on for people. So these are just sort of some of the ideas, hopefully, that we'll develop through the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Okay, and Adam, if we can hand over to you.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. Apparently I don't get mics or any of that sort of stuff. No, this is what happens when you show up late. It's okay. I often get told that I talk too loudly anyway, so I'll try and go. Hopefully, I live up to my reputation. So I'm from Channel 4. We don't really do compliance at Channel 4. Some people might say that's not such a great thing, but anyway, so I'm here mainly to talk about diversity and a particular piece of work that we did maybe about 12 months ago. So we partnered up with a company called Action, who are actually downstairs if you guys want to go check them out. But we worked on something that we call Born Different, which was a new kind of campaign for us. I think it's particularly timely, though, because not only is there a load of kind of media stuff about diversity and representation and things like that, whether it's Lenny Henny or Idris Elba talking about it, whether it's what's going on with the Oscars. I just think that's moving into more and more and more industries. I think if you're a company who thinks that diversity and inclusion means that you can have a policy on your intranet and you're kind of sorted, It's really not. You need to have more than that. You know, this isn't a nice to have, this is a need to have moving forward. So it was especially for us, but I think it's going to become more and more elsewhere. So as my handy clicker doesn't work, I've really lost out on tech today, haven't I? Hey, there we go. All right, so that was the question that we posed everybody in the office. You know, what has this got to do with you? You know, Channel 4, we pride ourselves on being at the cutting edge of all of this sort of stuff. So why would we have a problem with that? We have ethnic minorities on our shows, we have disabled people, we have LGBT, we've got all of this sort of stuff covered. We did the Paralympics, for God's sake. I mean, come on, we do this kind of thing. But that's not really the reality of it. If you actually look at what we're doing, we can do so much better. And it's not about resting on our laurels. Not that the Paralympics wasn't fantastic or anything like that. What we did was we launched the 360 Diversity Charter. So we actually did this, we put this out as a document, it's all published, it's all out there. We put 30 different game-changing things that we wanted to do, both inside and outside of our organization. This is who's represented on screen, this is who is behind the camera, and this is who's in our own office. We really wanted to look at what that was, and we set ourselves some really, really challenging targets. And then the question was, how are we actually going to make these things happen, and how are we going to get there? And so Born Different was the kind of kick-off for that, to really engage staff in the building to think, look, this is how you're going to impact on this. This isn't just about us, you know, commissioning another show and then ticking that box. So this is what the training itself started to look like. So these are a few bits and pieces so you can get a sense of what was going on. I'm sure more people technically competent than me can explain how some of these bits work. But basically we wanted to make it interactive, interesting. It asks questions. You know, it's looking at things like unconscious bias. It's looking at, don't just go for the usual suspects. We're using Ali G, so Channel 4 talent, who's been on the show to talk about stuff in a particularly Ali G type way. You know, we're looking at all of those different bits and pieces. This wasn't us preaching and saying this is what you should do. This was us exploring Channel 4 content, exploring questions, and really asking people what they should do themselves. I love this floating head slide. I'm not really sure what happened to the top of poor Dan's head there. It seems to have been chopped off a little bit. He's got a bit of a kind of 50p thing going on. But we got Channel 4 people to talk about what diversity really meant to them. And this wasn't, I think diversity is, and this is why it's important, and all that sort of stuff. This was literally, what does it mean when I'm in the office? How do I interact with it? I work in, obviously Jon Snow's slightly different, because he's a bit of on-screen talent, but everybody else worked in different parts of the business internally. It wasn't how do we represent this on TV, it was how do I do it in finance? How do I do it in HR? How do I do it in our IT teams? What does diversity actually mean in my world? So we got them to really talk about that and engage with people. The reason we did that was because we wanted people to watch this and then talk to other people. This wasn't, here you go, 20 minutes, diversity, done, sorted, you've got it, we don't need to worry about it anymore. This was think about it, talk to the person next to you about it, and start that discussion. So we did some advertising internally in a particularly kind of Channel 4-y type way. We came up with a new kind of logo and that sort of stuff. We did a bunch of events around this where we got people to talk about it. It's still ongoing. This isn't done by any stretch of the imagination. The diversity charter that I talked about, we've just launched this year's version of it, where we've talked about how we did on all of those 30 game changers. Some of them we did really well on, some of them we didn't do so great on. And then why and what's happened, because diversity is a really big, difficult, challenging topic. You can't just kind of sort it all out in 12 months and be done with it. So what's it got to do with you? So this is probably the absolute opposite of what you should ever put on a PowerPoint slide, with way too many words and some of it's upside down. But what this is this is what the desktop looked like that we put out there. We asked people to do something off the back of this. We asked people to go in and redo, if they needed to, their own kind of personal profile about how they identified themselves. Some of this was, you know, if you are BAME, most of the time, that's going to be fairly obvious to most people, and we're going to have listed it in there. LGBT is sometimes a really kind of personal thing that people don't want to share, and they're not comfortable with that. So we needed to make sure that people were comfortable with what we were going to do with that information and how we were going to use it. Disability is another one. whether people identify themselves or how they think about themselves when it comes to disability, is that going to have an impact? Is it going to have a knock-on on my job? We needed to create a safe space where people could really talk about these things and do some stuff with that. You know, off the back of this, we had so much kind of uptake and so much goodwill from people actually wanting to go in there and do that. A lot of our internal targets, we actually met some of those just by having a better understanding who was already in the building, which doesn't mean to say that we could go, oh, brilliant, we don't need to worry about that anymore. But what it does mean is that we can target in on the areas that we really needed to focus in on so we can make sure that we're moving people around the business accordingly. So that's really it in a nutshell. I mean, and that's why we did it. You know, it was about being different. It was about being included. It was about Channel 4 representing the UK as a whole and making sure that we were all really, really engaged with that. So hopefully some of that sort of stuff will come out over the course of, you know, the questions and things like that.
Right, thank you, Adam. Before we go on, because we're going to run through the main points that were listed in the program as well. Has anyone got any questions about what the guys have been through so far that they want to just ask them before we move on? Anyone yet? No? Okay, that's fine. What we'll do then is we'll address the questions that were listed, and hopefully that will generate a few more as we come out. So I'll start the first one, and then we'll go through each of the guys with their answers. So Sharon, I'll start with you with the first one. The question was, can diversity training ever really be effective?
For us, we're at the beginning stage, the same way that Channel 4 isn't big into the compliance. We have an HR group, diversity, there's diversity and inclusion groups. But as far as the training, in a way, I'm kind of glad we don't have that click next. We haven't put it in that format of the compliance stuff, but I do believe the approach that we're starting with is we're increasing awareness of our population. The gender folklore, there's other TED Talks that have been put out by very diverse individuals and really promoted within the elevators. So I'd say we're not doing the traditional training part. My mantra is engage, educate, empower. So we're at the engage stage, I would say. And I know as an organization from a State Street perspective, there's a lot more going on, but nothing is formal. Our concerns much more lie with the compliance as far as training goes like that. But I'm kind of psyched. I think this is an area we could be super innovative with. I'm taking notes. Being on this panel has been very educational for me. So I think we're headed in the right direction because it is such an important topic.
Adam.
Strangely enough, yeah, I do agree that it can be effective. I think you have to be sensible about how you do it, and training is almost a bit of a misnomer for it. It's not sort of, look, this is diversity and this is why it's good and all that sort. I think most people sort of get that. If you have an organization where people don't really get that diversity inclusion is a good thing, you've probably got bigger challenges. So it's not about teaching people why diversity is good. I think it's about helping to start that discussion inside your own company about what are we actually going to do about these things and what does that really mean. You know, we've talked about, and we looked at some of these things. I think Sharon said it was about hiring and that point of it. Okay, that's brilliant, that's fantastic. So I don't think most companies have we're not going to hire women for this role, or we're not going to hire somebody who's disabled. You know, they're probably not going out there with that intention. But the reality is that you're looking at who you're bringing in for interviews, and it's hardly surprising that you end up with, whether white males or whoever, from your talent pool. How do we get beyond that? How do we find people who we can? That's the challenge. When we bring in a supplier, do all our suppliers look pretty much the same? If they do, how can we find a different set of suppliers where at least we can bring in that voice? It doesn't mean a different set of suppliers is better. It doesn't mean that we don't end up hiring the other person who we would have anyway. But are we actually going out there and finding wider things? And I think that's the conversation that people should be having. But you can only have that conversation if your training really sounds and speaks to the issues and the challenges that people have. If you say, this is diversity, don't do this, do that, people will just switch off. If you say, this is diversity, it's really hard, we're not sure how we're going to do it, you need to help us, here's how we're going to start, then I think it can be really effective.
Yeah, you made them part of the solution.
Yeah, so I think I'd echo the role of the training is clearly to educate, but it's to start the conversations, and by having the conversations in the business, that's when things start to change. I'd also go back to the point that I made earlier on about setting the overall sort of culture values of the organisation, and I think it is really important that the training is supported by that culture, and that there is either a cultural change programme that goes to formally support that, or that the values of the organisation are well defined and also supported through training to say this is what we value. The two things coming together then really address the issues and make sure it stays on the agenda, make sure it stays as part of the discussion, and gives it that stickiness and longevity. Otherwise it's just a isolated training event, and then the day job gets in the way of everything.
Okay. Anyone got anything to add? They want a question on what they've said there? No? Okay. What we'll do is we'll move on to the second point. I'll start with you, Norman, on this one, because I know we discussed this before, about using compliance data. How do you do that, and can you actually support the business with data that comes out?
Yeah, going back to our roots as an engineering services company, we work for a lot of regulated industries. And those regulated industries are very data hungry. They need to know that their people are compliant. They need to know that they've had all the training they need to have, for their roles. And that can be a much broader set of training than diversity. It's across health and safety. It's can they weld properly? Can they work safely in their environment? As part of our solutions, we are collecting that data around all the training that people get. As I mentioned, we have their row profiles defined. We know what they have to do, so we can track that they've had that training and actually create that data. We've worked for organisations who have found it really hard to actually get the training records of their people and actually be able to tell their regulators whether and what training their people have had, whether those people are suitably qualified and experienced to do those roles. And the systems that we use and the data we collect allow us to run those reports on a daily basis, an hourly basis. We could run them every minute of the day if our customers really wanted to do that. But they actually use that information then, to support their business in terms of going back to their regulator to prove that their people are suitably qualified and experienced. But they also, use it to ensure that, in line managers' conversations with staff, they're having the conversations about, you need to do this training. Why haven't you done it? And also, finally, from a sort of HR training perspective, we're using it to schedule the right training so that people can actually get the qualifications and the knowledge that they need to perform their jobs. So I think the ability to get that data and then do something useful with it for the business, really adds some power and some value to the training community. Okay,
Sharon, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say the data in our world is critical. Companies go under and they get in great trouble for not having it recorded. So we absolutely keep the data analytics. This past year, we analyzed it and realized how much our compliance training had increased, what was the impact on behavior. We are looking too for other ways to prepare our audience that this is coming. So we're creating a pre-boarding, onboarding, and reboarding of our population. Also, when a new hire comes on, they have 10 days to get it done. And on day 11, if your compliance training isn't in, your boss's boss will not get a promotion. So it's serious. It matters to State Street and to other banks like that. But it's pretty overwhelming. As I was a new hire in the past year, I went into shock. I was in a financial services and not institution previous, and I was educated on what that difference was. So we are taking it on ourselves to not change or cancel out, but really prepare people when they come in the door that this is coming, this is what's expected of you, and here's the implications. And we do need the data to support that. So very, very important, and we're looking to make it more effective in the data that we gather.
Compliance-wise, perhaps not. We're almost kind of founded not to comply. So I think you'd probably get fired if you did do it on time, or at least that's what it feels like sometimes. The diversity days, I talked about, we did some stuff within that, and then you can really look at where you need to focus in. So one of the areas where we might seem a little bit different, we wanted to get close to the UK population as far as gender split, but Channel 4 actually has a lot more women than the UK population as a whole. So that's an area where we sort of need to look at that. But where's it focused? And it's focused at the much more junior levels, and it doesn't filter up through the business. And so by looking at where people are and how long they've been there and how that works, from an L&D perspective, we've been able to look and say, well, why aren't people moving it through? And the initial idea is probably, well, we need to put more development in there, we need to put more support, we need to give them some of the tools that they need. But then when we look at the data for who's actually accessing the training, it's predominantly men. So we're running training, but men are accessing it and using it, even though so it's just looking at trying to pull all of those pieces together and say, why aren't these people accessing the stuff that we need? So we can get out there, we can use it as a conversation starter. So we can say, what is it that's holding people back? Women are much more likely to be on flexible working. They're much more likely to be part-time. They're much more likely to not be in on certain days. That finds a challenge for them to go on some of the more traditional training that we've offered. So what that's done is it's said, right, we need to look at different ways of offering training to people so that they can access it in a way that actually fits around their job and fits around the things that they're doing. So we've taken that data and we started to really do something with it. But it goes back to that question at the beginning, why are you using this data and what are you doing with it? And are people going to trust you with that? Male and female, perhaps not as controversial a topic for people to talk about. Disability, which is a big push for us this year, is perhaps a little bit more sensitive for people when they talk about what is my disability and how does it impact how I do my job and how can we support that. So it's digging into that data and seeing what you can actually do with it.
Yeah, I also know, just to add to that, from working in financial services as I do with the insurance side, the data that's come in the past has purely been how many people have been through it, have we reached a certain percentage, are we bothered about how well they did in a little test that was at the end of it? And you know for a fact that perhaps our general counsel department might look at that and say, oh yeah, 95% of people have done it, that means we're compliant. But to an outside body, in the past, perhaps like the FSA, that's probably all they were looking for. And I've kind of detected, I think, in the last couple of years, at least, since we now have the FCA and the PRA, which used to be the FSA, they like their letters and everything, there's, I think, a bit more of an undercurrent that they're actually looking at understanding of what the issues are, rather than just a score at the end of it. Because we all have been through those programs and got through them as fast as we can, and probably not necessarily taken things in. But it's looking at perhaps that data that we've got and thinking, okay, does this mean what we think it means? Or if an outside body did ask us to say, okay, you've got your data, we're going to go around and ask a couple of people now what they understand, would that change your thoughts? And you'd probably say, yeah, we better go and teach them something different, because what they've seen so far isn't going to do that. And that's why we've perhaps had to change, I think, what we were doing as well, based on that data, because the data wasn't going to be good enough.
Yeah, and Matt, we were talking in preparation, saying how in our organizations, you can retake it until you get it right, like 10, 12 times. And Norm, you brought up a really good point, is you deal, like some of your organizations deal with nuclear bombs or something.
I mean,
can't keep redoing it.
Yeah. We've got some training again, and you know, it's that sort of training where you could just keep retaking it, take notes and make sure you then answered that set of questions at the end. And some of our customers, you know, they want to make sure that if people aren't, you know, basically understanding it, then they actually get an opportunity maybe to move from an e-learning type environment, you know, the Click Next environment, and can actually come into a workshop or a classroom event and, you know, get the experience of a broader set of people. Also then, if they're still not getting it in that environment, they actually get an opportunity to go and speak to the subject matter experts in this area. Mm-hmm. So particularly in the health and safety area, they would go and see the SHEC team and actually, you know, talk to a subject matter expert who can explain to them the importance of certain working practices and health and safety environments. Yeah.
It was funnier when I heard like the nuclear bomb example.
Yeah.
I was like, life or death. We don't want them taking that 12 times, do we?
Yeah, they wanted to associate it with The Simpsons, but I don't think that's a good analogy. But There we go. And I think to reflect what was said earlier around the regulators, our experience of regulators is they went through a phase of being reasonably happy to look at the training data and say, yes, we can see that people have done some training, therefore, they obviously have knowledge and they have some skills. What they're increasingly now focused on is the experience part of the SQEP. So they can see people are suitably qualified. They now want some evidence of actually they can actually do their jobs and put into practice the training that they've had. And what we've been doing, again, with our customers to reflect that is to bring that workplace application learning into the training record. So within the working environment, if a training session is set up in the working environment to practice something or practice a drill, that is then recorded and becomes part of the learning record. If they're demonstrating a competence or some compliancy around their workplace activities, we then create a session around that. We record, who was leading that session, who was assessing it, and who was being assessed, and that forms part of our learning record. So what the regulators now get is not only this is the training people have done, but these are the workplace examples where they have demonstrated their capabilities and abilities to do the things that they've been trained to do. So we very much see that as where the regulators in our industries are starting to move towards.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next one. This, I think, for Adam, I can see part of this relating to you, but part of it perhaps not so much relating to you. It's how can you innovate in a heavily regulated environment? I'm guessing yours isn't that heavily regulated, but if you want to start with that one.
Yeah, will get me out of the way.
Yeah.
I do a massive disservice to an awful lot of really talented people who work at Channel 4. We are regulated, obviously. We're looked after by Ofcom. We deal with some of the riskier side of television at times. I mean, not all of it, come down with me, not that risky. But some stuff is. So some of the, Channel 4 News and dispatches and some of the program that we put out there, there is some regulation that we need to look after. So I think the buzzwords that we always use, and this is something that kind of comes into it, is risky, not reckless. And what's the emphasis of what you're doing? And are you taking a risk? Are you pushing boundaries? Are you doing something that's challenging and new and interesting? And if you are, then you're on the right side of it. If you're doing something that is potentially damaging, then you're not. And we have an awful lot of responsibility to an awful lot of people, both inside the organisation and also outside it, and everybody who has a vested interest in Channel 4, and it's quite an emotive brand for people. To not do something that is so far off there that really, really upsets people and really turns people against us. So we do have those conversations internally. We do ask ourselves, what side of that line are we on? And I think for us, it's always that question, whether it's some of the advertising that we do just for our training programs, which can be at times a bit on the limit, through to our legal teams who deal with our news and current affairs. It's that question, is it risky? Or is it being reckless? And if it's reckless, then you're going just a little bit step too far.
Sharon. So with us, I would strongly encourage that you consider supplemental learning. Once again, we have a compliance group. They create what we'll say, click next type of training. But what we wanted to do is ensure there was an increased awareness and understanding. So we used solutions like a Y-Draw, the quick hand, doing the picture, and we did it for the Voca Super 23A, which I educated myself on much of this as well. And we use things like a convertible car that they're driving around in for the covered funds, and when it wasn't covered, and we had them driving through, and we didn't use all American type of visuals because this is a global solution, a global issue here. We used the Bank of Ireland, visually in the background with the drawings. We had, they had woodland creatures at some point for whatever, groups of people that were looking at it. That went over really interesting. It didn't appeal to all, but it was appealing to a group of people that maybe had 3 to 5 minutes, wanted to make sure they understood it in a different manner. We also used simulations. So things like the Clear Desk guidelines, we had a GoPro and we used this company ETU, and they actually allowed us to be able to say, hey, I left this document on the printer here. And you think it's obvious, you really do, but understanding that you're not allowed as a manager to put something in someone's draw. However, you can put something over it, and you need to have company internal listed on things. And we got really good feedback from the folks that took it. We didn't make it required. We didn't want to add ourselves into that mix of people being angry, taking it, but we did want to say, look, this is a different way. It's 5 minutes. We're letting you know that if so-and-so's on vacation and they left out some confidential documents, what are you supposed to do as an employee? Does it mean that I just take, like I did my first months, everything on my desk and put it in a drawer and shove it and lock it? That's not what they wanted you to do. They wanted you to have a full understanding of what was regulatory and allowed to be out on your desk and what wasn't. And then lastly, we're investigating some brain science tools. A company called QStream is doing this questioning, where instead of getting 45 minutes of regulatory training, you get 2 to 3 minutes a week. And you get a question like it's shuffled in a deck of cards. And you look at it and you get the question. If you get it right, awesome. If you get it wrong, you get an understanding as to what you did wrong. And it shuffles through for 6 to 10 weeks or however you want it. And what the really neat thing is, it allows your manager to better manage the folks, because they'll know to speak to Susie about XYZ regulatory component. And for Joe, don't bother with that, but there seems to be an issue with this compliance training. So it's now embedded itself into almost the performance development plan of the employees. And we have our legal and our compliance group begging to have this company come in and explain more about it. So we're really researching and investigating, and I strongly encourage and recommend to put innovation in compliance and regulatory. For God's sake, don't get rid of the stuff that you absolutely need, the stuff that you need data on, but get creative and look at other technologies and solutions to make sure people fully understand and comprehend it.
How would you treat innovation? What sort of thing have you done for?
I think it's probably similar. It's bringing different media to bear on the training. We talked about the click next, and it's trying to move away from the click next, make that training more engaging. Yes, you have to have the assessment piece, but even the assessment should lead to something. I mentioned earlier in the example about if people clearly aren't understanding something, there are other routes that you can go through to access more support. But I think it's about making that that training really engaging, bringing it into many different channels. Also, we've seen used a number of sort of different media to keep it up and relevant. So the use of emails, the use of text messages now is getting more prevalent. But there is the danger of that it's just overload, and in the end people just start deleting them rather than reading them. So it's trying to find those other channels that work, keep those other channels fresh. Use the intranets, use the landing pages that people are going onto every day to just keep the awareness there, but not too overtly that it becomes a nuisance and they start to move away from it rather than engage with it.
Okay, thank you, Norman. We'll move on to the next question, and I'll start with you, Sharon, on this one. Okay, what would you give as perhaps as takeaways, recommendations about how you would make compliance training truly effective? I know you touched on it just there about making it different, but are there any other recommendations perhaps you could give to the audience?
Yeah, I would stay connected to the audience, which is your organization, the population. You don't need formal focus groups, but ensure that people are getting it. Where's their questions? Keep it global. Blue sky is a big issue in Europe more than in other parts in the US. Ensuring that you're creating the solution with the most farthest reaching group, maybe not the most in population, but we would check with APAC and EMEA, making sure that they're feeling accommodated. It's hard enough having the regulatory compliance type of training, and diversity, definitely. Start with the diverse and get their thoughts and feedback. And you had mentioned this earlier, make it part of the solution. Make your organization part of the solution. Make them feel as though we're all in it together. They own it. I saw things this week, campaigns, things like that. We're just working on that. But one thing that we've been really working hard at is ensuring that the organization feels as though this is theirs and it's not just being thrown out at them, but that we're all in it together, we're an ethical, it's part of our values, and we're all headed in the right direction.
Adam.
Yeah, it is that ability to get everybody to engage with it. I don't necessarily think it's the format that you do it within. It's that, is this something that's interesting to me? Is this something that's relevant to what it is that I do? I think sometimes with compliance, we can go too big with, the world's going to end and we're all going to get sued and the business is going to fall down. And I think for most people, nobody wants their company to disappear, but they probably think, all right, that's a bit of a disaster and that's probably not going to happen. So does it really hurt if I don't do this? That kind of thing. So I think some of it is breaking that down to be smaller, and some of it's just, this is actually going to make your life easier. This is a better way of working. This is something that you'll actually actively want to do. And that's where you bring that solution piece in, is letting people discover different ways of doing some of this for themselves. But I think, it has to be based in exactly what's going on in your own company. It has to be in the kind of language that people use in your company. And that doesn't necessarily mean the way that you'd like your company to sound, but actually what people really say and do and think. And then, getting people to challenge the solutions to that and saying, here are some options. I think we talked about it earlier when we talked about legal things. Sometimes you think, it's a black and white issue. But it's not a black and white issue, because legal's never a black and white issue.
That's right.
Legal's always, it might be that, and if you do this, maybe you'll get sued or maybe you won't. So you can't say, do this, you'll be fine, don't do that, and we're all going to hell. You need to be able to think about all of these different solutions and think for yourself and make snap judgments. And so it's about training that sort of stuff, and that really requires people to actually fully engage with compliance training and not just passively view it and take it on board, and then you hope that they remember it.
Yeah, you brought up a great thing. I had forgotten that our ethics group created a training that they had the executive, the senior layer, deliver it just in that manner, and it brought up dilemmas. So if you're in this situation, what would you do? And they debated it, and there was no black and white answer, but there was the right path, and we had a framework. So it wasn't, I'll call it compliance or ethics every time. They had to figure it out. And these were super senior leveled people. And so we took it offline and we made it part of that dialogue. And we did it in every location, every region. And it was a real big win. The ethics group did a great job on that.
Now, I think, again, reflecting on some of those points, it's about making it relevant to people. So, why is it important? Why should I pay attention to this? So I think there has to be, some element of, potential consequences. If this doesn't happen, then, this is the consequences. People could get injured. The company could, get fined. Whatever those consequences are, I think that shows the importance of the training. I think, we said it needs to reflect what happens in the workplace. So it has to be relevant to your industry, your sector, and what you do. And again, we said even in this discussion, it really has to reflect the cultural values of the organisation, because if it doesn't, it's not going to stick. So again, I think that link to an overall cultural message and the way people act is really important. If you say one thing and you do something else, you're not going to change behaviours. So those things have to be totally in line.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, a couple of sessions I've been to as well at the conference, there's a couple of little points that I pulled out from there as well. One was something that Kate Evans mentioned in the 70-20-10 session with Charles Jennings, and something she called 505, which it was before training. A manager actually, this is any training, not just compliance and diversity, but before any training session, a manager talks to the person who's going to take that training for 5 minutes, asks them what they're expecting to get from that training. Then the 0 in the middle is, well, they're on the training, so they can't ask them anything. But then the 5 afterwards is 5 minutes after that training. Ask them, what did they get out of it? What does that make them think about? What perhaps are they going to change? And actually just connecting, because it's just that, again, it's a little bit of connection between a manager and the employee to perhaps embed it a bit more, make them think about it, give them some ideas as to where that's going to go next. And the other thing was, I don't know if anyone attended Kathy Moore's session yesterday afternoon, but one of the things she mentioned was about designing training. And we're so used to, in the corporate environment, we get all of this information from a subject matter expert that we're supposed to cram into some half-an-hour module with a test at the end, and expect them to go through and know all of that topic at the end of it, irrespective of whether it means anything to them. But what she said is change it around. Throw them straight in with a question and an exercise and let them fail. And then take them on to where the information is that's going to fill in the gaps. We've always been too scared to do that. We've always said, oh no, we've got to give them all the information first and do it in the standard way. But why not throw them straight in at the deep end, as she put it, and make them fail? Because from that, you probably learn a lot more than reading information that doesn't bear much resemblance to what you do in a day job. So again, it's just perhaps thinking in a slightly different way and just changing stuff. Even for one intervention, I suppose, is one way of doing it. The last question of the 5 that we wanted to make sure we addressed was about the role technology can and also cannot take in compliance and diversity training. So if I throw that over to Norman, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I've mentioned quite a few times now about the data part of what we do. Key to us is having that underpin learning management systems that allow us to track that data. So I think having good technology that allows you to let the data, report that data, analyze that data, look at the trends, analysis on that data. So you're not just saying this has happened, that was good or bad. You're actually saying, but if we don't do something, then these things are going to happen. Either our compliance is going to continue to track upwards, or if we don't do something, our compliance is going to start falling away. So I think it's both backward-looking, but more importantly, forward-looking. So I think that data set is key, and you need that underpinning learning management system to be able to give you that data and the analytics to present that. In terms of the technologies to deliver the training, we talked a lot about the click next, the e-learning, and some of the material we're seeing here from Channel 4. Again, you need the infrastructure to enable that training to happen seamlessly across the organisation. The last thing you want to do is push out a lot of training content to people that when they start to run it, they can't access it. It doesn't run properly. It doesn't record the outcomes or results. So I think having good technology and solid technology to underpin all the interventions is very key.
What can tech do? I mean, tech can do a lot, but strangely enough, not all of it. It allows you to have that consistency of a message through something. So we use ours, we used it to launch it, and now it's one of the first things that you do when you kind of join Channel 4 to get a real sense of what Channel 4 is all about. It allows you to get those messages through. It allows you to start doing that understanding. It's a great conversation starter for something. We're really proud of the stuff that we did with Action around making it interesting and engaging, and really giving people an opportunity to interact with it. But it flows into other stuff that we have to do alongside it. So we do diversity and inclusion training, which is a terrible kind of cover word for stuff. And we've kind of ditched doing it like that now, and then we just do training, and we talk about stuff within there instead, rather than having special recruitment sessions for diversity. But we move it into that. We have discussions and conferences and conversations and all sorts of stuff going on. But what the training technology side of it allows us to do is everybody's coming in from a similar starting point, and everybody's had that shared experience that they can then use as the conversation starter, as opposed to everybody coming in from lots of different angles and spending the vast mark of it trying to get all on the same page to know where it is that you're going. So I think that's where it's useful. Where it's less useful is if you, again, just kind of rely solely on the tech and say, we've done this piece, we've rolled it out, all of these people have seen it, therefore they all understand it in exactly the same way, and they're all going to do it in exactly the same way. So it's got to be, it's massively kind of, everybody knows this, it's got to be blended, but it's absolutely got to be part of other stuff that you do, and not just sitting there on its own. Even if it's a 5-minute conversation with somebody that you work with after you've been through it, just to talk about that experience and what you liked and what you didn't like.
Yeah, and leveraging off of that, I would say the technology, we all know you get the butts and seats, or you get the click next results. It's the so what. what's the context of this? What does it mean? So you have these finished things. What I'd like to see, and hopefully with the maturity of the compliance industry, is the follow-up in the Kirkpatrick 3 and 4, the alignment to it should be aligned with the business strategy. If you weren't in the financial industry, it wouldn't be so important. I mean, there's a lot that can ride on this. And I don't know if there's enough time taken or if there's enough bandwidth to have this context put into it. So I think, as the industry matures and as we see that this really does, behavior change and awareness and understanding matters, that's where I think we're really going to have to be in a couple of years. And that with diversity as well. So what are the, we have the technology to measure what the stats are. I love the way that you guys question things again. That's something I'm pretty sure they're afraid to do in the US. But I think having an understanding of what the numbers mean. It's going to be the data analytics and how we evaluate it. I think that's going to make the difference as we go forward.
Okay, those were the main points we made sure we absolutely had to cover. Has anyone got any questions about what we've been through and what you've experienced as well with perhaps the compliance training that you have to do, whether it's diversity or others as well? Yes.
Yeah, I'm quite interested. The traditional view of compliance have been like a company policeman.
Yes.
And something you said, I have to do my compliance training or there are consequences.
That's right.
How do you make people want to do compliance training rather than have to do it?
Well, that's where we put the supplemental stuff in, and we're just starting to see that. I mean, as a learning person and being horrified by it, couldn't be more in pain over the experience. We have people go online, it's isolated even though everything's going on around you. We try to create those visuals, and we got different reactions. Oh, is this what we've turned to, cartoons? That was really painful and hurtful, but you had to take it in and understand it's not going to be for everyone. Also, we're in a big mantra. I have like a jar, and we don't call it training. Training is you train animals, you train for a sport. Our hope is that you're learning and you're impacting behavior, and that's starting to resonate with our organization. That's a big deal, and I think training was a word of the early 90s, and it's come back again because it's all this required stuff, and it is at that point where it's just rote memory, and we want to go beyond that. So the extra stuff, the simulations, brain science stuff, and we didn't get caught into having to have it go through legal and stuff because it is supplemental. So until we figure that magic out, we're trying to make it as interesting as possible with the other.
I think a lot of times compliance training becomes this is how you must do it rather than these are some of the things that you've got to, but how you go about doing that is kind of open for interpretation, and then that allows people to think about it a little bit more, and it sounds like something you want to do. Okay, I know where I'm supposed to get to, because all jobs have things that you're supposed to do even though you don't really want to do them, whether it's compliance or whether it's called something else like showing up. So it's how you go about doing that, and I think if you just say, look, this is the end result, this is where we want you to get to, talk to people, work it out amongst yourselves, do something there. I think that's a much more adult way of getting people to think about compliance training than, right, this is what you got to do, and then these are these 17 forms that we've already decided you need to fill in, and you sit there thinking, that's a bit overkill, I don't really think that's necessary. So I think it's that sort of stuff, which is, sometimes you can do that within a training environment, and sometimes it's a wider business, cultural piece that you need to talk to other people about. But I think it's that bit where you might have an end goal, but allow people to think about how they're going to get there themselves is much more interesting.
Yeah, I think also, again, going back to the cultural piece of the company. So if it's part of the values and part of the induction when people are come into a company, it's explained to them, the culture of the company, why safety is important, why diversity is important, and then they're signposted to that training. It gives them a little bit more motivation to actually go and view that in more detail. And I think also it's around the conversations that get kicked off because of the focus on specific areas. So if you haven't done the training, it's very hard to engage in some of the conversations because you don't have the knowledge underpin to engage in the topic. So through all of those activities happening, people actually want to go and, well, what is it? What is it about safety? What is it about diversity? What do I need to know? And then I can be part of that conversation, and then I can be, part of the, emerging culture of the organisation.
So I love hearing about people saying, be more diverse, use these cool tools, all of these fantastic things. And I used to work in our IT department, and the problems of making sure everyone's Flash was at the right version, et cetera, et cetera. So there was always a good reason why we couldn't use the next cool thing. And that's not them deliberately being blockers, but there's practicality to that side. So I wonder if you could talk to your experience there where you've come across those sort of blocks where it's not someone just getting in the way, but it's, I've got to work around these, and some of the things you've done to overcome that.
I'll kick that off because we're currently going through, we're building some new e-learning stuff that we're having some difficulties with, which has nothing to do with the training provider that we're using. It's everything to do with our internal systems, sort of kicking people out of stuff. So that has been a challenge for us. It's about scaling it back, I think. There's a lot of really cool stuff that's here, and you think, oh, that's quite shiny and whizzy, and we really want to do that. It's about the message that you're trying to deliver and the training that you're trying to get across, rather than doing something that's cool and new and interesting. You know, it's the story and the journey that people want to go through. So I think it's being on the right side of the tech that you can do and working within the parameters of what you've got. People have this impression, Channel 4, we're, you know, some sort of cool media agency when you're going to get in there, and then our tech is so not that at all. It's, I mean, we have desktop computers still. It's like working in, you know, the early 90s or something like that at times. With tech-wise, we're so far behind everybody else that we're even dealing with. So as cool and exciting as our e-learning is, this isn't people wandering around on their phones and tablets and stuff like that. We're nowhere near that yet. So it's the story and the message and the thing like that that's really interesting and engaging for people. It's not always how it's delivered, I think.
A key to success here, and it was accidental on my end, is hire a graphic designer. Absolutely amazing. We have one gentleman, you know, new to the learning industry. I'm trying to like get him, oh, it's exciting, you know, you want to get in here, but what he can make a simple PowerPoint look like it's out of this world. We're using podcasts, right? So we're almost going back to what maybe was around way back, you know, and you kind of forgot about it, but you're like, wait a minute, we can use that. Our company is actually finally, I have a BlackBerry if anyone wants to know what those look like. And we're saying we're not going to create stuff for that, but, you know, as people come in, they're getting iPhones, you know, can't access anything, but at least we're getting it there. So I think, you know, being creative and hiring people out, like diversity in regard to even their background. And I'm just blown away by how much that has elevated using tools that are okay, but using them in such a different way because this person isn't aware of the industry, I think is pretty cool and really kind of shepherding in a whole new generation, not age-wise, but skill-wise, has been really kind of cool and successful for us.
I was actually going to say something very similar, but I was going to say hire a great instructional designer. But because I do think a lot of it is down to good instructional design, and that obviously can be supported by a great graphics designer. You know, one of the things that I think has been noticeable for me is the way that e-learning is subtly changing from being everything thrown at it, so that it contains everything and you need every plug-in possible going, to actually a simplification of the design, so that it's clean, crisp, and really gets over the information that you actually want, you know, people to know, rather than cluttering it with so much good technology and every last, you know, new bell and whistle that you can think of. So I think what I've been seeing is a much, much cleaner approach to e-learning, which doesn't, you know, is not so hungry on the tech, but is getting the information across in a much more succinct and better way.
Yeah, we actually just did a portal, and by putting everything in one spot, it's excited, especially our distribution and sales group. And we're talking like a 3-minute, not high-tech stuff, but the opportunity to keep it simple and clean has allowed people to actually engage. And we don't call it training or learning, it's a knowledge now site.
Just one quick question. As we're talking about the challenges of producing training on diversity, etc., how have you overcome any challenges on accessibility with using maybe the new tools and the e-learning, etc.? Has that been a challenge for you?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's part of that conversation. that we're having, the more we did this sort of stuff, the more we learned about it. So accessibility-wise, yes, we did run through lots of problems at times, but we have accessible versions of the training for people who need it. We have a variety of different media kind of in there, so there's lots of images, text, graphics, all of that sort of stuff, lots of video, those kinds of things. We haven't had any particular issues with anybody who hasn't been able to access it or hasn't been able to use it, but for this year in particular, so disability is a big thing for us in 2016, so Paralympics coming up, we're going to do a real big push around that, and that's our next kind of iteration of a lot of stuff that we're doing, is understanding more about it. I know this isn't an e-learning part, but what it has allowed us is to explore our recruitment site, which is so not disabled friendly at all. It's a lot of, right, now put loads of text in this tiny little box, which is not very helpful to an awful lot of people. So it's from an e-learning perspective, we haven't encountered any major issues with anybody internally, although I'm sure it could happen. But it has opened up some questions elsewhere for us in other parts, and it's just part of that conversation, part of that discussion. The more you explore this topic, the more you uncover things where you need to look at what you need to do elsewhere.
I don't have it directly for this, but yesterday I moderated a session with Abel Henry. He was from the UNICEF group, and they actually dealt with that by creating a version that's downloadable. And that, I mean, I'm sure we have all the notes on that and stuff. That was amazing. And I would recommend, as he was hitting third world countries, that was something that they found incredibly effective for accessibility.
And I think it's also about maintaining all the other open channels. So, there is a tendency to want to push lots of things into e-learning, but the ability to still deliver certain events in classrooms and workshops for accessibility reasons is, to my mind, still there. So what we tend to do is, still enable delivery through classroom type sessions where, that type of access is key to making sure that everybody can access the training.
Because I have sometimes worried that when you do maybe go down and try and create accessible e-learning, I feel that they get a less rich experience, and it seems such a shame. And it's how do you get over that? How do you, that is quite a challenge, I think, how you can provide an on-par experience, whatever somebody's abilities and range of use is.
I think that's at the core of what I was saying at the beginning around really understanding what diversity really means. Nobody sets out to create e-learning that excludes a portion of the workforce or excludes a portion of the people that are in there. You just do it because you don't really understand what it is that's actually a challenge for somebody. And it's only by doing some of these things and starting to uncover it and talk to people that you don't end up with, oh, well, we'll give them a paper version because that'll be all right, or we'll give them a big text version and then that'll be fine. So it's having that different blend and then working with people and saying, what can we do and how can we make it happen? We were a little bit spoiled, certainly from the visually impaired perspective. Corey, who is one of our announcers, is visually impaired, and she's quite a big champion of some of this stuff. So she worked with us to do the voiceover for this and to give us some ideas and some examples of some things that we could do that wouldn't scream, this is the accessible disabled person version. You get like this crappy bit over here and everybody else gets the good stuff. It's something that's actually kind of integrated and works with it. Have we cracked it for everything? No, we haven't, but we're starting to chip away at bits and pieces and start to work that stuff out. And again, that's why you need to get people in a safe space, certainly with disability, to come and say, this is what I have, this is how it works, and these are the things that would really help with me, and then we can start to work on that. That was part of that data piece that we wanted to pick up, so we could find out what challenges we had internally and then help people with that.
Yeah, and we did the train the trainer. So the ethical decision-making course, which was instructor-led, it was beautifully done, and not by a learning group, by the way, but it really laid out, this is the first section, this is the second. They used real scenarios. So 6 real scenarios that people weren't saying, well, this isn't us. No, this is completely you from 10 years ago or 8 years ago, and there, wasn't a right way. And they trained the executive group to deliver it. And then myself and others would help facilitate it, you know, those that could. But that was really neat, and it was neat to see some executives a little uncomfortable leaning more on us, and then others that you were just amazed with and, you know, impressed. There was a build of trust, respect. So the train the trainer, and going back to what you were saying, Noam, is putting it into that instructor-led, going back to simplicity, but it allowed it to be delivered in Asia with a local flair, and yet it was a global solution with the train the trainer template. So that really went beyond quite a bit.
One quick question.
Hi there. So diversity is a huge waterfront, and I just wondered. I was really interested in. I'm interested in compliance, but I was also very interested in what Sharon said. It's the so what afterwards that really matters. In your experience, you mentioned initially about taking the gender thing. That was the first TED talk that came up, and Adam was saying we're going to focus on disability coming up soon. In your experience, is looking at diversity more effective in terms of training, in terms of the so what, if it's taken in bite-sized chunks and focused in on particular aspects, or is it better done as a whole piece?
I'll keep mine quick. I would go to the analytics. Like, I didn't bring it up here, it wasn't as relevant, but a tool like Textio, putting it down to a practical solution. So we created a tool that as you do a behavior-based interview or as you interact with people, what language do you use? What are the things that come up? They did it color-coded, positive, negative, female, male. It was an education. And not that I'm saying go buy this tool. I'm saying look at creating a solution that for the user looks very business. Okay, you're going to save time for me. You're going to make me a better interviewer, a better person because I'm more aware of the unconscious bias. As much as you can make that a tool and they don't realize they're learning, I think that was a big win that I've learned over the past year.
It's a massive topic, diversity, and I think it's like any business challenge that you have. It's thinking about what is going on in your own company and where you are, and then working out which bits you need to focus in on. I don't think it's a case of right, let's do gender first, and then we'll do PAME, and then we'll do disabled, and then we'll have cracked it. Oh wait, hold on a minute, we forgot about LGBT. Now we got to do that, and now there's something new, and now we're talking about social mobility and all of that sort of stuff. I think it's getting in there. It's looking at what's going on. It's talking to people within the company. Where do we think we should start to focus our energies because we can't do everything all at once, and then targeting in on those. There's a lot of debate even within Channel 4, about this whole year of disability thing that we're doing, whether it's the right thing or not. Why are we talking about disabled people? What, have we forgotten about all the other diverse stuff that we should be doing? Which isn't the case. It just allows us to focus a little bit more in certain areas. So I think it's entirely dependent on what works for what you have going on in your area. I think for us, it just makes sense. We can build it around a lot of our Paralympic coverage, and we can build it around the fact that that is an area that we're particularly weak in when it comes to our internal benchmarking measures that we've got. That's a real area that we need to focus and get it more up to speed with the rest. So that's why we've chosen to do that. But it's, you know, we haven't said, right, we're going to park the rest of it or anything like that.
I think for us it's a similar story. It's about a program and a journey. So you start off, you know, increasing the awareness of a topic. You then discover certain things. I mean, unconscious bias has been mentioned as one area, and then you say, yes, actually, we need to do something about unconscious bias. So you do something on that, and that leads to something else. So, you know, hopefully you're taking your, you know, organisation on a journey of increasing maturity of this, and you will identify the topics that are important to you at that time, and you'll focus on those particular topics. But as you've said, it won't end because it will keep growing.
Okay, hopefully that's answered your question. Thank you everyone for the questions, and just like to thank the team here for all of their work on here, as well as for Norman, Adam and Sharon as well. So thank you to the team. I've just got one quick announcement to make. There's been a room change if you're attending a couple more sessions after this. So if you're going to the instructional design, which is T1S6, it's a snappy title. It's now in room 2, so that's with Julian Stodd. And if you were going to the video for corporate learning, that's now in the main auditorium. We're just across there. Okay, so those are at 3:30. So thank you for coming along.